Son locked up his disabled mum without food until the neighbor's dog did the unthinkable. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. It's always awesome to see how far our stories are reaching. Mary's house always smelled of freshly baked bread and lavender candles. Even though she could no longer walk after the car accident, she kept that simple home filled with the warmth only a grandmother could give. Sitting in her wheelchair by the living room window, she spent her days watching the birds in the backyard and praying quietly, as if trusting that God hadn't forgotten her yet. She was a delicate-looking woman with fair skin and blue eyes that seemed to hold oceans of memories. She wore floral dresses, always clean, though she no longer had the strength to care for herself. In theory, her only son, Michael, was the one taking care of her. He was a man in his 40s, strong, with a stern face and a constant frown. To the neighbors, he was the devoted son. But inside that house, when the door closed, the truth was very different. Michael rarely answered when she called him. He ignored her requests for water or food, and when he got angry, he locked her bedroom door. He told her she needed to learn to stay quiet and that nobody could stand useless old ladies. Mary didn't cry anymore. She just waited. Next door, in the neighboring yard, lived Helen, a kind 70-year-old widow with a dog named Max. He was a retired German Shepherd police dog with grey hairs on his muzzle but sharp eyes and a soldier's spirit. Ever since they moved to the neighborhood, Max had taken a quiet liking to Mary. Whenever she appeared at the window, he'd run to the fence, wagging his tail, as if he understood her loneliness. That morning, though, Max was restless. He hadn't seen Mary at the window. He went to the gate, sniffed the air, and barked twice. Helen, sipping her tea, noticed his unease. "What's wrong, Max? Missing your friend?" she asked. Max ran to the fence, staring hard at Mary's house, and barked louder. Helen stood up slowly, put on her jacket, and walked to the sidewalk. She clapped her hands and called out, "Mary, are you okay?" There was no answer. Michael appeared minutes later, opening the door with fake kindness. "Oh, Mrs. Helen, my mum's asleep. She took her medicine early and is resting. Thanks for checking," he said. "It's just that Max is acting funny," Helen replied, trying to peek over his shoulder. "We didn't see her today." "Everything's fine, don't worry," Michael said with a forced smile, shutting the door before she could say more. Inside, Mary sat in the dim light. Her bedroom window was covered with an old blanket, and the only light came from under the door. She hadn't eaten since the day before. Her thin fingers clutched a white rosary, and she whispered prayers in a voice almost too soft to hear. On the other side of the fence, Max growled quietly. He sensed something. He smelled neglect, and it bothered him deeply. He paced in circles, went to the front door, scratched at it, then returned to the fence. Helen watched him with curiosity and a knot in her chest. As evening fell, Michael left again. He locked all the doors, turned off the lights, and left his mother alone. She listened to his footsteps fade, then heard silence. In that silence, Max barked loudly. A long, heartfelt bark. It wasn't normal. Helen, now wearing a wool sweater over her shoulders, crossed the yard. "This dog's not right," she muttered. Max stood on his hind legs against the fence, howling. Helen looked at Mary's house. Something inside her said this wasn't okay. "I'll come back tomorrow," she told herself, "and if I don't see her, I'm calling the police." But tomorrow might already be too late. The sun was just peeking out when Michael returned home, his shirt wrinkled, eyes red, and the sharp smell of alcohol clinging to his skin. He slammed the door shut, as if the world owed him something. He walked to the kitchen, poured himself a glass of water, and then headed straight to the room where he'd locked his mother. He turned the key quickly, opened the door just a crack, and tossed a pack of crackers onto the floor. "There you go. Don't bother me all day," he growled, shutting the door again and locking it with a rough twist. Mary, her lips dry, stared at the crackers without the strength to lean down. Her frail body trembled. She'd spent the night awake, praying in a whisper barely audible. The sound of the door locking felt like a sentence, but what Michael didn't know was that right on the other side of the wall, Max had been there all night, unmoving, his head pressed against the fence, listening. Max didn't bark this time. He just lay there, eyes fixed on Mary's house, ears alert. Helen, seeing him so tense, decided not to wait. "Come on, Max," she said, grabbing her coat and a basket of freshly baked rolls. "Let's see if that poor woman's awake." They crossed the yard. Helen stood at Michael's gate and rang the doorbell several times. No one answered. Max started barking loudly, frantic, circling the entrance as if looking for a way in. "Michael, good morning," Helen called. "I brought some rolls. Is your mum there?" After a moment, Michael appeared at the second-floor window, disheveled and annoyed. "She's asleep. Leave us alone," he shouted, slamming the window shut. Helen felt a pang in her chest. Something wasn't right. Max scratched at the ground, digging with his paws as if he wanted to tunnel under the gate. Next door, Sophie, an 8-year-old girl, watched from her window. Her blonde pigtails hung over her shoulders, and she held a sketchbook where she'd drawn Max next to Mary. Seeing the scene, she ran downstairs. "Grandma, Max is acting weird again," she said. "I know, sweetheart. I don't like this," Helen replied, her brow furrowed. Meanwhile, Mary had tried to reach the crackers. With great effort, she leaned to one side of her wheelchair, but the wheel got stuck on the worn-out rug. She fell to the floor with a faint groan. The impact was sharp. Her head hit the wood. She lay still, her breathing shallow. Only the rosary remained in her hand. In the yard, Max lifted his head. Something deep inside him snapped awake, an ancient, primal instinct. He started to howl, a long, painful sound, as if his soul knew someone was suffering. Neighbors began stepping out of their houses. An older woman peeked out, her apron dusted with flour. A young man paused his morning jog. Everyone heard that piercing wail cutting through the air. Helen knew she couldn't wait any longer. She pulled out her phone and dialed. "Police, I need to report something suspicious. I think an elderly woman is in danger." On the other end, the operator asked for more details. Helen described the situation: Michael's yelling, Mary's isolation, and Max's behavior. "We'll send a patrol to check," they replied. Max kept howling. Sophie walked up to him and stroked his head. "You want to help her, don't you?" she said. Max licked his paw and looked back at Mary's house. Minutes later, a patrol car pulled up at the end of the street. Michael came out immediately, looking more put together, with a clean shirt and a fake smile. "Officers, how can I help you?" he asked. "We got a report of possible neglect of an elderly person. Can we come in?" "Of course, no problem. My mum's asleep, but everything's fine," Michael said, opening the door carefully. The officers stepped inside, checking the living room and kitchen. Michael led them to Mary's bedroom door. "I don't want to wake her. Her health's fragile. She took strong meds this morning." One of the officers nodded, though with some doubt. They did a quick walk-through and left. Max from the fence growled. He didn't buy it. Helen stopped them on the sidewalk. "And the woman, is she okay?" "The son says she's resting. We didn't see anything odd," they said. "He's lying," Helen muttered, pressing her lips together. When the officers left, Michael slammed the door shut. Max leaped at the fence, desperate. That night, something would change. The night fell heavy, as if the whole world was holding its breath. The street was empty except for one figure standing still under the nearest streetlight. Max. The German shepherd hadn't moved from the fence by Mary's house all day. His eyes gleamed with a restless spark, as if something inside him knew time was running out. Inside the house, the air was cold. Michael was snoring on the couch, an empty whiskey bottle resting on his chest, the TV flickering with static. The place smelled of stale air, dampness, and neglect. Mary had been lying on the floor for hours. The fall had bruised her hip, and she could barely move her arms. Despite the pain, she didn't scream. She knew no one would hear her. Her lips moved faintly, whispering, "Lord, if you're taking me, let it not hurt too much. But if you still need me here, send me a sign." And the sign came with 4 paws, a wet nose, and a heart full of purpose. Max, guided by an instinct beyond logic, circled to the alley behind the house. He knew Helen sometimes left the side gate slightly open. With effort, he nudged it with his nose. He slipped through the dark alley until he reached the back of Michael's house. The laundry room window was ajar, held by a rusty hinge. The dog stood on his hind legs, pressed his front paws against the glass, and pushed with his head. The frame gave way with a small creak. Max leaped inside silently, as if he were still on duty, as if he understood the danger. The darkness swallowed him, but his nose led the way. He moved through the hallway, dodging furniture, following the scent of fear and pain that hung in the air. He reached the locked bedroom door. He sniffed, growled softly, and scratched at it. From inside, a faint voice whispered, "Who's there?" Max whimpered gently, his way of saying, "I'm with you." The door was locked, but it was old, made of thin wood. Max stepped back a couple of paces, eyed the door, lowered his head, and charged. 1 hit. 2. On the third, the wood gave way, opening just enough for him to slip through. Mary saw him through the shadows like a vision. A single tear rolled down her wrinkled cheek. "Max, is that you?" she said. The dog approached slowly, lay down beside her, and rested his nose on her chest. She lifted a trembling hand and stroked his head. "I knew our God wouldn't forget me," she whispered. Max stood up at once. There was no time to waste. He walked down the hall to the living room, passing Michael, who was still passed out, and stood by the front door. He began to bark loudly, again and again, with rhythm, with urgency. Each bark was a cry for help. Across the street, Sophie woke up. She got out of bed, went to the window, and saw the dog inside the house. "Grandma, Max is in there," she shouted. Helen ran to the window and saw the dog's silhouette. She knew this wasn't just a hunch anymore. It was an alarm. "Call 911, now," she told Sophie. Sophie dialed with trembling fingers. "There's a dog inside a house, and we think an old lady is in danger. Please come quick." Meanwhile, Max kept barking. Michael stirred on the couch, blinked, and stood up, swaying. When he saw the dog inside the house, his face twisted. "What the hell?" he muttered. Max bared his teeth, stood firm, and growled. For a moment, Michael felt fear. He took a step toward the hallway, but the dog's snarl made him back off. Outside, sirens wailed in the distance. Red and blue lights sliced through the darkness with flashing urgency. 2 patrol cars screeched to a stop in front of Michael's house, their tires squealing. Helen and Sophie stood on the sidewalk, holding hands, their faces pale with worry trembling in their eyes. "He's inside. The dog got in through a window and won't stop barking," Helen shouted to the officers, pointing at the house. The police, armed with flashlights and radios, moved quickly to the door. One of them knocked hard. "Police! Open the door!" he called. Inside, Michael scrambled to hide the empty whiskey bottle, trying to pull himself together. He opened the door just a crack, his body blocking the way. "You guys again? I already told you my mom's fine," he said. The taller officer stared at him firmly. "We got a report of a dog in your house and possible cries from inside. We need to come in. That damn dog snuck through a window, but there's no problem. Everything's under control," Michael replied. "Then you've got nothing to hide. Let us in," the officer said. Michael hesitated, took a deep breath, but before he could decide, another officer was already circling the house. He found the broken laundry room window with clear paw marks. From there, he heard a faint whimper. He rushed to the back door and pushed it open. It was unlocked. He stepped inside, flashlight on. "Police! Anyone here?" he called. Max came out of the hallway, barking loudly when he saw him. Then he turned and ran back to the bedroom. The officer followed quickly, and then he saw her. Mary lay on the floor, her face pale, her skin clinging to her bones. One hand rested on Max's fur, her eyes half closed. Beside her, a white rosary gleamed in the flashlight's beam. "We've got an injured person," the officer shouted into his radio. "We need medical help now." In seconds, the house filled with footsteps and voices. Michael tried to protest, but another officer pushed him aside and cuffed him without a fight. He didn't say a word, just lowered his head and mumbled something no one caught. Paramedics arrived almost instantly, rushing in with a stretcher, monitors, and oxygen. Max stayed by Mary's side, but when he saw the medic kneel beside her, he stepped back carefully, head low, eyes fixed on her. He didn't bark. He didn't whimper. He just watched. "She's dehydrated, showing signs of malnutrition and trauma from a fall," the lead medic said. "But she's alive. This dog saved her life." They lifted her onto the stretcher gently. As they passed through the door, Mary opened her eyes just a sliver and whispered, "Where is he?" "He's right here, Mom," the paramedic said, leaning down. "The dog's okay." She gave a tiny smile, as if that one answer was enough to spark hope. "Thank you. God does listen," she murmured. Max walked beside the stretcher to the ambulance. When they tried to stop him, Helen stepped in firmly. "He goes with her. They haven't left each other's side. Let him," she said. The officer nodded. The dog climbed in with calm steps, settled by Mary's feet, and rested his head on the white sheet. The ambulance drove off, lights flashing in the silence. Helen hugged Sophie, who was crying quietly. On the street, neighbors started coming out, their faces lit by the patrol car's glow. The lead officer approached Michael, now in the back of the police car. "You have the right to remain silent, but for what you did, I hope you use it," he said, slamming the door shut. The county hospital was a 20-minute drive from the neighborhood, but that night, it felt like an endless journey for the paramedics. Inside the ambulance, the air was tense. The heart monitor beeped a soft but weak rhythm. Mary, eyes closed, breathed with effort. An IV slowly fed fluids into her veins, as if calling her back to life. Max lay by her feet, still as a statue. He didn't take his eyes off her face, as if he could read every unspoken word in her silence. The younger paramedic, pale and new to the job, looked at him in awe. "I've never seen anything like this," he whispered. "This dog hasn't left her side for a second." The driver didn't answer, just nodded and pressed the gas a little harder. When they arrived, the ambulance doors swung open. Nurses and doctors were waiting with a stretcher ready. Mary was moved carefully. Max tried to follow, but a nurse stepped in front of him. "Sorry, he can't come in," she said. "Let him," Helen shouted, arriving in a car behind the ambulance with Sophie. "He found her, protected her, kept her alive. He has as much right to be here as we do." The head of the ER approached, looked at the dog, then at Mary on the stretcher, who was faintly murmuring his name. "All right, he can stay, but he can't bother the staff," he said firmly. Max walked through the doors silently, moving slowly to lie down by the emergency operating room. There he stayed, like a guardian. Inside, doctors worked fast. The fall had caused a fractured pelvis, and there were clear signs of long-term neglect. Pressure marks on her skin, atrophied muscles, dangerously low blood sugar. A nurse with blonde hair, Emma, wiped a tear as she checked Mary's vitals. "How could someone do this to their own mother?" she muttered, anger held back. "Some people have no soul," Dr. Mitchell replied, eyes fixed on the monitor. "But at least she didn't die this time, thanks to that dog." In the waiting room, Sophie played with her sketchbook, drawing Max with wings like a four-legged angel. Helen sipped strong, unsweetened coffee, her eyes heavy with thoughts. An officer approached with a folder in hand. "Mrs. Helen, we need your formal statement," he said. "Sure, but first I want to say something," she replied, standing slowly. "That dog is more human than many who walk on two legs. Don't forget that in your report." Meanwhile, Max kept waiting. Every time a door opened, he stood, sniffed the air and looked for his friend. Nearly 2 hours passed. Finally, a nurse came out, her scrubs stained with iodine. Seeing the German shepherd, she smiled warmly. "She's stable, fragile but alive." She asked for him as soon as she came to. "Said he was her angel," the nurse said. Max wagged his tail slightly. He followed the nurse to room 112. When the door opened, Mary was awake, weak, hooked to tubes, her face pale, but alive. Seeing him, her eyes filled with tears. "My brave boy, my sweet Max," she said. The dog approached carefully, rested his nose on the bed, and closed his eyes. Mary lifted a trembling hand and stroked between his ears. "God heard me, but he sent you," she whispered. Morning light filtered softly through the hospital curtains. Room 112 smelled of disinfectant, but also of hope. Mary woke slowly, her eyelids heavy, her mouth dry. It took her a moment to remember where she was. Then she turned her head and saw him. Max asleep on a blanket beside her bed, his head resting on his front paws, as if he hadn't closed his eyes in days. A faint smile crossed her face. She reached out a trembling hand and touched his ear. Max opened his eyes instantly, lifted his head and wagged his tail slowly, with the quiet dignity only old dogs know. They didn't need words. They understood each other from the soul. "You're still here," Mary murmured, her voice hoarse. "Thank you for not giving up." Just then the door opened and Emma, the nurse, came in with a breakfast tray. "Good morning, Mrs. Mary. So glad to see you awake," she said. Mary pointed with her eyes to the German shepherd. "He never left me alone." "We know. The whole hospital's seen it. He's our hero," Emma replied warmly. Then she leaned down and whispered to Max, "Good boy. You're an angel with a tail." Max tilted his head, as if he understood the praise. Emma set the tray on the table and left, leaving the door slightly open. Hours later, Helen arrived with Sophie. They carried wildflowers in a glass vase and a handmade card covered in hearts and a drawing of Max with a cape. "Mrs. Mary!" Sophie exclaimed, running to the bed. "You're alive!" Mary let out a short, emotional laugh. Her eyes welled up. "Thank you for not forgetting me," she said. "We never did," Helen replied, stepping closer slowly. "We always knew something was wrong." Sophie went to Max, who stood and licked her cheeks. She hugged him tightly. "You're a super dog. I drew you as a superhero," she said. Mary watched the scene, her heart swelling with gratitude. For years, she'd felt invisible. Now, thanks to that dog, she knew she wasn't alone. A few hours later, a social worker entered with a folder. She was a young woman with grey eyes and a firm expression. She introduced herself as Sarah and explained that Mary's case was under formal investigation. "Mr. Michael was arrested for gross neglect, unlawful confinement, and abuse of a vulnerable person. Given his record, he won't be out soon," Sarah said. Mary lowered her eyes, sad. Despite everything, he was her son. But she said nothing. Sarah continued calmly. "Once you're discharged, you won't go back to that house. There are options for you. Assisted living or supervised homes, but we've also had a proposal." "A proposal?" Helen asked, surprised. "Mrs. Helen offered to be your temporary caregiver and asked if you'd stay with her if you agree, of course," Sarah said. Mary's eyes widened. She looked at Helen, who nodded with a gentle smile. "I've got space, time, and company. I don't want you to spend another day feeling alone," Helen said. Mary closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and a tear slid down her cheek. "It'd be an honor to share my life with you all," she said. Max wagged his tail excitedly. Sophie clapped quietly. It was as if everyone knew something good was finally beginning. A week later, the air in Helen's house smelled different, of freshly baked cookies, warm blankets, and hope. The guest room had been turned into a cozy, bright space for Mary. By the window, her wheelchair sat next to a small table with a vase of white tulips, a gift from Sophie. Max, as expected, never left her side. He slept at her feet, walked beside her when they went to the yard, and lay by her bed when she rested in the afternoons. He was her faithful shadow, her silent guardian. "I've never felt so safe," Mary said one morning, watching the trees sway in the breeze. "And it's funny, it's not because of locks or walls, it's because of him." Helen, knitting by the fire, looked up and smiled. "Dogs sense things we don't. They don't talk, but they understand more than we can imagine," she said. Sophie, sitting on the floor with her colored pencils, held up her latest drawing, Mary and Max under a blue sky. "I told you I'm sending this to the newspaper. Everyone needs to know he saved a life," she said. "You think someone will print it?" Mary asked, laughing. "Of course it's a true story, and everyone needs to know you can't ignore a dog's barks," Sophie replied. Days later, Sophie's drawing appeared in the Sunday edition of the local paper. The story of the grandma rescued by a brave dog spread fast. Interviews, calls, flowers came pouring in. People from across states sent letters with kind words and even small awards for Max. One afternoon, a man with a deep voice and grey hair arrived at the yard, wearing a leather jacket with badges. "I'm Robert, former head of the county canine unit. I heard what that dog did, and honestly, he should have been on my team," he said. Max looked at him curiously, wagging his tail slowly. Robert knelt down and pulled a shiny badge from his pocket. "It's symbolic, but he earned it. Honorary officer for bravery, loyalty, and service to the community," he said. Sophie clapped excitedly. Mary, her eyes shining, took the badge in her trembling fingers. "I never thought I'd live to see something like this," she said. "Sometimes," Robert said, standing, "heroes don't wear uniforms. They have paws and a heart bigger than most people." That night they held a small gathering in the yard. Neighbors brought cakes, lanterns, and blankets. It wasn't a party. It was something deeper, a shared thank you. As it grew dark, Sophie stood on a small box and read something she'd written. "Max isn't just a dog. He's a soul who heard what grown-ups ignored. He didn't hesitate when everyone else stayed quiet. He's the friend we all need, and the one Mary didn't know she had." The silence was complete. Then came the applause. Mary cried openly, not trying to hide it. Helen took her hand. "You'll never be alone again," she said. And Max, as if he understood every word, rested his head on Mary's lap, closed his eyes, and sighed. Fall began painting the leaves orange and gold, and the air turned crisp in the small neighborhood where everything had changed since that night. Helen's house, once just another on the street, now felt like a haven of warmth. Visitors came often, some out of curiosity, others out of kindness, and many just to meet the dog who saved a helpless grandmother. Mary, from her chair by the window, saw life differently now. She was no longer the tired, forgotten woman living in her son's shadow. She'd reclaimed something she didn't even know she'd lost: dignity, and it came not through human promises, but through the quiet act of a noble animal. One afternoon, as they sipped tea on the porch, Sophie ran up with an envelope in her hands. "Something came for you, Mary. It's got an official seal and everything," she said. Mary took it carefully, opened it slowly, and pulled out a sheet with the county court's letterhead. "It's the case ruling," she murmured. "Michael got 6 years in prison for aggravated neglect and unlawful confinement." Helen, sitting beside her, placed a hand on her shoulder. "I know it hurts, but it's also justice," she said. "I don't hate him," Mary said with a sigh. "It just pains me to know my own blood could do so much harm, but I don't want to carry that weight anymore." "Forgiving isn't forgetting," Helen said softly. "It's choosing not to let the past steal your present." In the yard, Max chased a ball in his mouth. Despite his age and his past as a K9, he had moments where he acted like a puppy. Sophie joined him, laughing, running through the trees as leaves fell like autumn confetti. "Catch it, Max," she shouted. "Go faster." Suddenly, Sophie tripped on a root and fell. Max ran to her, sniffed her with concern, and stayed by her side. Sophie sat up, laughing. "I'm okay, just a fall," she said. Mary and Helen watched with warmth. "That dog has a way of looking after everyone like they're his own," Mary said, her eyes fixed on them. "And maybe they are," Helen replied. "A soul like that, it doesn't know boundaries." That night, by the warmth of the hearth, Mary dared to write a letter. It wasn't for Michael or the court, it was for Max. Though he couldn't read it, she felt she needed to put her heart into words. "Dear Max, I never imagined salvation would come with paws and no words. In you, I found something neither blood nor years gave me. True company. You taught me that even in the darkest cruelty, a light can shine. Thank you for not giving up. Thank you for being my voice when no one listened. Thank you for staying. With eternal love, Mary." She folded the letter and placed it in a wooden box beside the rosary she'd held through the longest night of her life. "Now I can sleep in peace," she murmured, stroking Max's head as he slept at her feet. Life at Helen's house found a new rhythm, slower and more mindful, as if time there knew the important things shouldn't be rushed. Mary had settled into her new routine completely. She woke to birdsong, ate breakfast in the yard wrapped in a wool blanket, and always without fail had Max lying by her side, like an extension of her will. Over the days, her health improved noticeably. Color returned to her face. She smiled more often, and she could move her arms with less effort. But the most striking change was her eyes. The fear was gone. Now, there was peace. One morning, Helen came in with another envelope. "This one's from the local TV station. Looks like they want to interview you and Max," she said. Mary laughed softly, surprised. "Me? What could I say that's worth hearing?" she asked. "More than you think. Your story's touching hearts. You need to tell it for those who haven't found their voice yet," Helen replied. The interview was set for the following Saturday at the town's Central Park. When they arrived, a small crowd had already gathered. Max wore a blue bandana around his neck with Guardian Angel embroidered on it. He walked with quiet dignity, greeting everyone with his tail, never losing sight of Mary. The cameras rolled. The host, a man with a warm voice named James, approached Mary with a genuine smile. "Tell me in the comments, on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate this story so far? Your opinion means a lot to me." "Mrs. Mary, how do you feel today?" he asked. "Grateful," she answered without hesitation. "Because I'm alive, because there are good people, and because this dog never let go of me." "What was it like, that moment you knew something was about to change?" James asked. "When I heard him scratching at the door, I knew someone was looking for me, that I hadn't been forgotten. In that moment, I understood not all miracles come from the sky. Some walk on 4 paws," she said. The crowd clapped, moved. Sophie, in the front row, couldn't stop smiling. Helen's eyes were full of tears, her heart quiet, as if watching a cycle close with meaning. James knelt to pet Max, who stayed calm. "And you, champ, how do you know she needed you?" he asked. Max lowered his head slightly as if in humility. An older woman in the crowd murmured, "That dog's got the purest soul I've ever seen." After the interview, people approached, some with gifts, others with hugs. A gray-haired woman named Patricia asked to speak to everyone. She stepped forward. "My sister died in similar conditions years ago. No one heard her, but you broke that silence. This dog is an answer. He didn't just save one woman. He reminded us to look beyond walls and fake smiles, that neighbors, friends, even animals can be the guardians human justice sometimes misses, she said. Mary couldn't hold back tears. She approached Patricia and hugged her tightly. Max stood between them, as if he understood their shared pain. When they got home, the sunset painted the sky gold and coral. Mary asked to stay in the yard by the fountain for a while. "Today, I don't feel like a survivor. Today, I feel alive," she said softly. Max lay at her feet and let out a long sigh. Sophie placed a small flower crown on his head. Helen lit a white candle on the table. No one said anything more. In that silence, everything was said. Winter arrived with its first frosts dusting the rooftops like a gentle white touch. Christmas lights began twinkling shyly in windows, bringing a sense of closure, reflection, and gratitude. In Helen's house, every corner glowed with warmth. Simple garlands, scented candles, carved wooden figures. But the most important thing remained invisible, the peace living within those walls. Mary, wrapped in a thick blanket, sat by the fireplace with a mug of hot chocolate in her hands. Her gaze drifted to the flames, not with sadness, but with calm. On her lap rested the old rosary that had once been her only comfort. Now, it was just a symbol. Her faith no longer came from fear, but from lived experience. Max, as always, lay beside her, his nose on the floor, eyes closed. The dog, once trained to track criminals, was now just what he'd always wanted to be, a companion. His fur had more gray, but his movements stayed steady, determined. He was an old warrior at peace with the world. "You know what I thought today," Mary said quietly, stroking his back. "If I'd gone that night, I wouldn't have known how much love was still left to live." Max lifted his head slightly, wagging his tail gently, as if agreeing without sound. In the kitchen, Helen baked cinnamon bread while Sophie hung a star on the Christmas tree's top. The girl no longer just drew heroes, she wrote. Short stories, poems, little tales where good always found a way to win. It all started the moment she saw a dog cross a fence for someone the adults had forgotten. At dusk, the makeshift family sat around the table. No feast, no fancy decorations, just hot soup, fresh bread, and hands clasped together. Sophie asked to speak. "Today I want to give thanks for someone, for Max, because he didn't just save Mary. He taught us all what it means to care. Sometimes you don't need to understand words. You just need to feel someone else's pain and do something," she said. Helen wiped a tear discreetly. Mary nodded, unable to speak, and placed her hand on Max's head. That night, before bed, Mary left her window open. The stars shone outside. She moved closer with her walker and breathed in the cold air deeply. Max, always by her side, sat and seemed to gaze at the sky too. "See that star?" she whispered. "I like to think it's for those who don't give up, like you." The silence between them was complete, but full of meaning. In the days that followed, Mary and Max's story spread to schools, senior centers, even canine training programs. It became a lesson in humanity, compassion, and what can happen when someone dares to look beyond appearances. And though years passed and time did its work, that story never faded. Because in every wounded soul, every forgotten elder, every lonely child, there's a seed waiting to be seen. And sometimes, just sometimes, all it takes is a dog to make it bloom. 3 years have passed since that night when a dog crossed a fence and changed the fate of a forgotten life. Mary never set foot again in the house where she was locked away. That door, for her, stayed in the past. Under Helen's loving care, and with Sophie's constant light in her days, she found a new home where she was seen, heard, and cared for. On Sundays, she went with them to the town church, always sitting in the same pew with Max lying calmly by her side, as if he too were praying. Michael, her son, was moved to a medium security prison. He served his sentence in silence. No neighbors visited him. A year later, he sent Mary a letter. It didn't beg forgiveness with fancy words, but admitted his cruelty and said he didn't expect a reply. Mary read it, folded it carefully, and placed it in the wooden box with the rosary and the letter she'd written to Max. "Forgiveness isn't reconciliation," she murmured as she closed the box, "but it's rest for the soul." Sophie grew up and, with help from a teacher moved by her story, published her first children's book, The Guardian at the Fence. It was shared in schools and libraries, teaching kids the value of empathy, listening, and courage. In the dedication, she wrote, "For everyone who's ever felt unheard, sometimes the noblest heart beats in a body covered in fur. Max, for his part, aged with dignity. His steps slowed, but his presence grew deeper. Over time, he slept more hours at the foot of Mary's bed, no longer ran like before, but stayed alert to her every move. One spring morning, Mary woke and found him sleeping deeply, his breathing soft. She called him gently, but he didn't stir. Max had gone quietly, just as he'd lived, with devotion, loyalty, and love. The whole town came to a small memorial in the yard. Children with flowers, adults in silence and genuine tears. Mary placed his blue collar on a stone by the old oak and said softly, "You didn't die. You became part of us. Wherever someone listens with their heart, you'll be there." That night, Sophie looked at the sky and pointed to a new star. "It's his. It shines brighter than all the rest," she said. And ever since, whenever an elder feels alone or a child suffers in silence, there seems to be a whisper in the wind, a warm breath that says, "Even if the world abandons you, a noble soul can find you." Thank you so much for sticking with this story until the end. If you enjoyed it, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps us a ton and motivates us to keep bringing new stories every week. And since you're here, take a moment to check out another one of our stories that's popping up on your screen. Big hug and see you next time. Stay well.